Now we present our project, the transition engineering work that Jeremy and I did over about 4 weeks of work. We have to do a lot of research, get a lot of data, and do a lot of brainstorming, some modeling, more brainstorming, more modeling. But hopefully you find the results interesting. This is a picture I took, a sculpture that I made on the beach in New Zealand, in Ecoles. And it's stable, it's standing there, it's not, but this is sustainability, right? That sustainability is a balance between risk and benefit. And you either survive or you don't. So if I think this is too risky, what can I do? Maybe I put another stone on top. Okay, that might actually increase the risk. Or if I take some of those stones and I move them down, then maybe the risk is less. So balance, always looking for this balance. There's more things you could do, but do they make it riskier or not? Right? So there we are, a little sculpture for you. Here's what the model that we're going to use to think about that balance. 40,000 years ago, there were people in this valley. 10,000 years ago. 5,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago. And many other places on the planet. Think of how many experiments there have been of the human project. In different places, with different resources, with different belief systems. There have been so many experiments of how do we do this project. There can't be only one right answer. What we know is that that balance is achieved when these things all work. We are large-brained primates. We're big monkeys. We are very vulnerable when we sleep. We go into a deep sleep and bears could eat us. So we make a safe place and we sleep together. We get our people we trust together at night. So that's why we have a place that we call home, because it's our safe place for when we're sleeping, to get our big brain refreshed. Okay. And we do things in this area, in that home, that do not need the motivation of utility and money. Yes? That's an interesting place. It doesn't need trade. It only has value and giving and goodwill. So there's a lot of work we need to do, but that's how it is. Now when we leave that place, we go out to do everything else. We go out to find water, food, to get resources. We go out to take the waste away. We go out to engage in society, to work, to produce things, to extract materials, to trade with other people, to do our cultural activities, to visit nature, to trade things with people. Okay? So this is the model of humanity. That's how it works. It's not very specific, is it? It doesn't say cars or rickshaws or, yeah? You could apply that model to any human experiment. Now, these are the things that have to work in order for that society to continue, to be sustainable. You have to have buildings that work. You have to have the technologies you use, whether it's a fire starter like this or a fire starter like that. And you have to have infrastructure to access those activities. So I'm going to call these activities, and being able to access those activities is what makes that system work. And the other thing is that in our world, accessing those activities requires an economic exchange. It requires exchange of a belief in the value of some fiat money. So that's our system. We're going to now work on the Grenoble transition, and I wanted to define what I mean by access to activities from that previous diagram. So Grenoble City, I'm talking about the metropole region with the different sectors and the city, okay? So I'm talking about this valley full of people, 450,000 people. We are going to focus on quality of life, making that whole system work. And that we know that access to activities is a key. And we need profitable industries and businesses. So that's our mission, and we're really going to focus on access to activities. I want to talk about one more definition. Remember we talked about perspective? Looking at the same thing from two sides. Access to our activities, we can look at it through the view of mobility. Being able to drive our car wherever we want, whenever we want, and park anywhere. That is definitely mobility. That's one way to access your activities. The other one is accessibility. Being able to get to your activity. And it doesn't matter how, you could get to it. Right? So that's being able to actually go wherever you need to. So I hope you see it's the same thing. We can look at the city two ways. One from the activity, and one from the going, from the mobility. But it might look like the same thing because it is, just looking at it a different way. All right, step one, 100 years ago. I mean, I don't know if you agree that right now I don't know what to do about the transport and the old buildings in Grenoble. So let's do this project and massifying everyone. 100 years ago, who is from Grenoble? Okay. How many generations? One. Okay. One. All right. Do you believe that there are people who live in Grenoble whose grandparents were here 100 years ago? You know somebody? Or are you? Okay. That's not that long ago, right? They were children, but 100 years ago, people you have known in your lifetime were here. Huh? Something to remember. There was about 60,000 residents 100 years ago, and you would recognize that city. You would recognize, if you went here and you walked around, it would look very much the same. So, fair enough. 100 years ago, what was the access? How did people get around? There was a lot of farmland where there's now houses, but in the city there was a tram network. And that tram network was 3 times larger than the one you have now. So you could use it. You could also walk to most places you wanted to go, because the locations of jobs, houses, activities were within walking distance, just like they are now. You know, we could walk to the center of town and have a coffee. Yes, people had bicycles, but this was your commute to work. That's what the congestion looked like in the morning rush to work. Okay? Good to know. There was science. There was the Polytechnic was here already. They were working on hydroelectricity. There was electricity. Not for hair dryers and things like that, but, you know, for lights. There were festivals. There were humanities. There was music. There was congestion in the streets on market days. Do you recognize that boulevard? Okay, in your time traveler's mind, picture someone standing in the middle of that street right now. Okay, some things have changed. Some things are the same, and some things have changed. All right. One of the things that has changed is we've gone from an accessible city to a mobile city. Okay? All right. Throughout the valley, there were trams. In fact, there was a line that went all the way to Savoy, 43-kilometer tram line, all the way up that eastern valley. It stopped at the towns along the way, and it picked up milk and chickens and eggs and potatoes. They went into the tram and they came back into the city. When the tram went out, it took goods that people wanted, flour. Also the other valley and down the other valley. So there was this type of tram that went in and out of the valley, and people could ride it too. But they probably weren't commuting to work on those trams, 43 kilometers. All right. The transport accessibility, we have estimated from a rough estimate of looking at old photos and measuring distances, because they didn't have a travel survey then, because they didn't have that mobility problem. They weren't trying to engineer for that. It was just working the way it was. So we've estimated at least 60% of trips were walking. There was a lot of tram access, so people could have used the tram. We really don't see much cycling. There were cycles, but we don't see that much cycling in these old photos of Grenoble. In other cities we do, but not here. So not quite sure what that is, but there you go. The commuting distances, if you just look at the locations of houses and factories and buildings, it looks like most people, their activity network was within 2 kilometers, their daily activities. They could go farther, but on a daily basis, that was the size of their activity system. What does that activity system look like if it's not a grid of streets? And think of the conceptuality of the fact that there are places that things need doing, and I need to be able to get between them. It's possible to organize that without a computer, except that we don't really know how ants actually do this. But that ability to organize the access to the activities, we can do it. We're at least as smart as ants. So this is an ant hill, so where the ants live, you pour molten lead in it and make a cast. So that's the ants' world that they made. Fair enough. I think it's quite lovely. All right, what happened from 1900 forward? What happened? Oh, we definitely had some problems. So there were some wars, the odd wars. In between the war, bit of growth. Then after the war, a huge growth, possibly because of an administrative change, that the city of Grenoble is no longer just that middle part, it's now a bigger area? No? That's just people?
Yes.
Okay. A big jump in people, and then kind of a stable population since then. So that's, this is just the city area of Grenoble, not the whole valley. But that's data we could find. So we probably will notice in our city the effect of this. If this many people moved here, then we have the buildings which existed here. They started to fill up. There were some more buildings built after the war, some buildings, and then a lot of buildings have been built here. And then not so many since then. Okay? So that's what we're expecting to see. Our current data about mobility, the travel survey from 2010 for the whole region, shows that people drive their cars. There is a 25% walking. That's probably the people who live in the central city. There is use of the bus and tram, and in a global sense, for a city, 11% public transport is reasonable. You know, that's not the lowest ever. The biking, 3% seems low, but again, in a global context, 3% is actually not bad. The Germans do better in some cities, and so do the Dutch, but you know, that's better than Los Angeles. That. And just some more data that we found. Grenoble attracts a lot of travel the center of Grenoble. Within Grenoble, there's a lot of people moving. But that whole region, people are moving around through the region too. They're moving a lot to move to a different place in that region. So what I'm going to get at here is you notice that if people have an activity within a kilometer, 15% of them still drive a car. 27% of all trips, so almost a third of all trips are actually quite close to your house. So again, that's probably that core area of Grenoble, and it probably is affected by student population. They will position themselves close to the university if they can. Then we have these 3-kilometer trips where the car just starts to dominate life. Once you get outside of that close sphere, you get in a car to go somewhere. All right, and we do actually have a good number of trips in the larger distances, and there are a lot of vehicles in this region. There's not much of a barrier to getting a vehicle. Another piece of data from the metropole, that there's this motion of people in and out of the city, around the cities. This is sort of the core sector area. And that's that 60% of that motion's by car. So that's why you have congestion, in case you didn't know. Everybody's driving cars. Your current housing stock, according to a report, it says only 14% is this pre-war. So I don't know if that looks right with that population. If you look at the whole area of Grenoble, there's some old stuff and then a lot of new stuff. And there was this very large building boom, 40s, 50s, and 70s, and then up through the 90s it kept going and then sort of has leveled off since then. So the stuff that was built in these eras, I don't know because I haven't been in them, but I don't think they were built with the same longevity possibility as the pre-war stuff. I don't think they are a 400-year design. Right? So that sort of defines our problem. There was this huge housing boom, and there needs to be another one because you built temporary housing. So that's the size of the problem there. All right, so we've got up to the current time. We've assessed our data, and now we need to look at what are the scenarios going forward. There's different kinds of scenarios. One scenario is if we do nothing, right? So that's business as usual, the first one. The next one is what if there are new technologies that come? Then what could happen? What if we improve efficiency? Then what could happen? And what if people change their behavior? So this is why you asked us to look at behavior, because it usually is a pretty effective scenario if it could happen. So let's look at each one of those. The business as usual scenario, we have a stable population. It doesn't start growing again. There are 2,900 social housing units built throughout the city. That's a plan that's in place. And we assume they're all good houses, low energy houses. The car trips stay more or less constant. There's been a growth in car trips. This is the mode shares of trips from the 60s, continuous growth of trips by cars, and then a drop, but we don't actually have the data to see if it's stayed level or what it's done. I don't know if anybody knows. But so for our business as usual, we're going to assume it sort of stays constant. And we continue with the tram services. Nobody has a great idea like they did back in the 40s to take out the trams. All right, we're going to keep them. So on that scenario, what we see is that if we do nothing, then our carbon emissions will exceed the targets. Because the target is a reduction in carbon emissions, not the same carbon emissions. And if we do nothing, we will at best have the same carbon emissions. So that's what happens with that scenario. And we continue our dependence on imported oil and gas for heating. What if there's a change of technology? One of the scenarios that we found is for penetration of electric cars. The current electric car market is about 1% of sales. So we know how many sales there are. 1% of those are electric cars. Let's assume, here's our scenario, if sales growth is 20% per year. 20% more electric vehicles are sold every year. That's pretty good. Then, in 2050, electric vehicles will comprise 2.5% of all vehicles. That's just numbers. Just that times that, okay? And that means maybe the air pollution's a little bit better and the congestion isn't better. And the city now needs to accommodate those 11,000 vehicles. Remember, we had 400 and some thousand vehicles? So the city now needs to accommodate those vehicles with some charging stations. So that's an example of a technology scenario. Refurbishing old buildings. Okay, the number of buildings that you have that are not at the best standard now, which is 40 kilowatt hours per square meter, if you shift them from 250 to 40, then you could reduce the gas consumption by 80%. So you could meet that target. And by 2040, that would mean about 6,000 houses a year have to be converted. A little bit of a how? I don't know, but that's the size of the project to meet that target. What we're left with is the big question, what about all those 1950s and 70s and 80s buildings? Do you refurbish them? Or do you rebuild them? Because that's a good question. If I have one of those beautiful old houses in the city, then I know what to do. I get the refurbishment going. So the target is good, but here the really big question is which houses and how to finance it and how to get people to do it, I guess, is the question. The scenario, people don't drive their car. They choose an insulated house, right? That would be the behavior that would drive change. So if travel declined by 10% a year, people, 1 trip out of 10 choose not to drive a car, they choose another way, then that target of 80% emission reduction could be met. So every year, 10% reduction of travel. So yes, that's a way to meet the target, is to get people to drive less. You might guess what's coming next. How exactly is kind of the question. How is it possible? What do we have to do to get that to happen? So now we're going to move to the next part. Because, okay, looking at scenarios, what I will say is that looking at scenarios never gives me an answer of what to do now. It tells me where to look, and it tells me where not to look, but it doesn't give me that creativity I need to figure out what we should do. I know what we want to do, but what we should do is a different thing. All right. So I'm still looking. And now I'm going to look going forward to 2118. What do we know for sure about 2118? This is the rate at which the world uses oil. 33 billion barrels a year. In 2118, what we know for sure is that is not happening. Okay? This is the rate at which the world uses gas today. 3,500 billion cubic meters a year. In 100 years, that is not happening. Okay? Between now and then, well, that's what the question is. But in the forward operating environment, that is the data that I know. That these are gone. The gas, the fracking of gas is way gone. It's finished. The pumping of oil is finished. I don't know what the trajectory was, but I know it's gone. Okay? That's the data I know. So remember the general, the military mindset. I got to just deal with what the facts are. Okay. It doesn't do me any good to not think about it, and it doesn't do me any good to deny it. That's just the way it is. All right, I can't win the war. And you know what? Sometimes when you know how it's going to end, you have to just play anyway. All right, if you're not a rugby fan, I'm sorry, you'll miss the reference here, but right. So we're going to jump forward now, 100 years in the future. 100 years in the future. It turns out that the physicists tell us that we cannot actually time travel to the past. We can learn about the past, but we can't time travel to the past because the past is already fixed. And so therefore, you being there can't be possible. There you go. You can't time travel to the past. However, it could be possible to time travel to the future. But if you did that, you would want to choose which future you go to. Because today, something will happen that eliminates possible futures and spawns new ones. Because today, we're going to fix what happens, and that will then change trajectories that are possible for the future. So from here forward, there's almost an infinite number of futures. Depends on what we do today. All right. So if we're going to time travel forward, it's very important to have a time machine that lets you choose where to go. Because most of the places Hollywood has shown you, you don't want to go. So we're not going to go to a Grenoble 2118 that has a zombie apocalypse, okay? We're not equipped for it. We don't know how to deal with it. We don't have enough guns. So we're not going to go to a zombie apocalypse. We're not going to go to the place where nobody did anything about climate change and it's really bad. We're not going to go there, right? We're not going to go to a place where society imploded and it's, like I said, Hollywood. We're going to choose the future of Grenoble where that past, the history, everybody did everything right. Okay? Does that future exist?
Yes.
It must, according to physics. What the probability of it is depends on what we do today. All right. So that's where we're going. So you're with me? I know. Thinking about the future can get pretty depressing, but that's not the future we're going to. Because we already know what we need to know from those futures. We're going to the one where everybody did everything right because we need to learn what happened there. Yes? Okay. We need to know what that's like. Look, if anybody wants to make a Hollywood movie and they want to know what that's like to put it in the movie, yeah, we'll do that project. All right, so the future we're dialing up has the same number of residents as today. Fair enough? Why not? Let's see what that's like. And what we notice when we first get there is that monument is still there and the sunsets are still beautiful sometimes. Fair enough? Not that different from today. And we also notice that the buildings that people are living in are quite low energy. So that transition has been made, that the buildings have been fixed. And there was a building boom, and now people are living in low energy houses. And they're quite comfortable. The Alps are still there. There's still snow on them. The rivers are still there. These are still flowing through town. There's farms. There's forests. Fair enough. The gondola is still there. Right? Why wouldn't we have kept up the gondola? It's iconic. So they've kept it running. And from a mechanical engineering point of view, there's no reason why the gondola couldn't keep going. People still go to the squares to have a nice day out, to have an ice cream. Yeah, of course they do. There's still museums. There's still shops. The churches are still there. They'll last another 100 years easy. The big square is still there. There's still food. You can still order a tartiflette. And everybody's got a baguette. Yeah? And a glass of wine. Grenoble's still a pretty nice place. There's plenty of room for riding your bicycle and walking. Because, the Metro Velo is still going strong, 100 years on. It's still yellow, still got the nice, comfortable seat. And the trams, unbelievably, they are still green and yellow. It's our thing. Yeah, there's trams. And the Grenoble universities are still here. Of course they are. We always need science. And, these famous people, we still remember them. And, Yes. There's still science here. It's a big center for science, center for learning. Students are coming. There's still lots of industries. Lots of things are happening. And people have healthy cycling lifestyles. We definitely noticed that. You used to think that only the Dutch could do that, or the Germans, but people do have a hard time finding a place to park sometimes, depending on how nice the weather is and how many people want to go to which cafe, and they have to circle the lot looking for a place to park. Oh, it's not that bad. All right. Another thing we noticed that's kind of interesting is dual-purpose trams. There's this new kind of tram that we can see there that moves goods around the city, because those big trucks are not there anymore. So how are people moving goods around to the cafes and to the markets? And where are they moving them from and to? Well, there's been some engineering. There's some really clever things. Ways to lift a heavy load and slide it into the tram. It fits perfectly. It has some suspension on it. There's a tracking code, so you know where the goods have gone, whether it needs to be handled immediately or whether it can be put on the siding for a day. They've got this whole system of how to move goods using the trams. And then in the city, where you can't have a tram, there's these electric trucks for delivery, and these are all made in France. And they work good. And so moving goods from the outlying areas and from other parts of France to our markets doesn't seem to be a problem. Nobody's starving. There's no problem of food there, even though there's no oil there. It's still working. Okay. And in the town, what we notice is that the Grenoble city is still there, that's for sure, and it looks very much like it did in our time, in 2018. It's still there. It's lovely. People have refurbished the old buildings, but now there's 7 other urban towns in the Grenoble metropole area, and the center of those towns looks a lot like a French urban town center. Right? You can walk to a cafe. There's apartments above the businesses. It's only a kilometer or so within that distance out to other things. So this town center is there. And what is not there is those things that were developed in the 70s, 60s and 70s. Nobody needs that anymore. Right? It just doesn't work. You've got lots of space that back in the day was used for parking cars, very low utility use of that space, and now it's being used for something else. So between now and then, that project of developing that space, maybe it proceeds very much like the project of doing that in the first place, right? There was a farm. You make a plan, you get a bulldozer, you put it in, and that happens again. There's that. You make a plan, you get a bulldozer, you build what's going to be there for the next 500 years. All right, that long-term view. And here's sort of what it looks like, that you've got that old city of Grenoble that we know, that's been there for so long, that works the way it does. It's still connected to the rest of the country by trains. But now here, where there's now nothing, or not nothing, but there isn't that same urban form that's here. There is There is some of it. It's been redeveloped. And the university is still there, but near the university there's a town center where, where there should be a town center. Because that's the way things work. And over on this side of the river also. We arrived here and we're looking for some breakfast. Look on Google. There's one place within as far as you can see. That's kind of a desert, really. It's not like it was back over on the other side. So those things have developed and flourished because that's how we live. And so what that does is it cuts down a lot of the distance that people travel, because their activity system is now centered around a town, an urban town. And if you think about all the activities you do, it kind of makes sense. How does it work? All right, you have a notepad there. You have a little piece of paper. What we discovered there is a thing that people there are calling their activity web. And it's a real thing to them, this activity web. And we say, what does that mean? And they say, well, it's my activity web. Okay, explain it. All right, well, take your pencil and put a dot on your paper. All right? Just a dot in the middle. And that dot is your home. So you go there every day. So that's the center of your activity web. Now make another dot to somewhere else that you go a lot. So if you work, right, so just put another dot and put W for work. And make that line like, how many times a week do you go there? Anywhere else you go? Do you have to drop off kids? Do you have to take kids to soccer? What is in your life? You go to a market? So put another dot for market. Do you go swimming twice a week with the swimming pool there? You go, I don't know. What do you do? Go to the bakery. What is your web of activity? And the people in this time know their web. I mean, it's like a real thing to them. There's my web. Because it's what helps them fit into the city. It's what helps them find their place. Is where they can do their activity web. Because going to cafes, going to a supermarket, the most important thing is where you are and getting to that. And so we asked them, how do you know? Like, okay, I understand that I could learn. Like, I come to Grenoble, I'm going to live here for 6 months. What do? I find a place, and then I walk around to look for, okay, where's the nearest supermarket, or I can Google it. And I establish this sort of pattern of the area of the town that I act in, that I live in. And they said, yeah, it's kind of like that, but it's more about actually these ones. I said, oh, I think that's like a different perspective, right? Because I have to go to these things, and I have to live somewhere, but really, I have to get there. So I can find my place in the city because of where I have to go. Oh, okay, I understand that. And they have a way to do that. Makes sense. Now, what does this urban village look like? Well, the experience of it, when we go visit it, is very much like a typical village, say, that's by itself, surrounded by vineyards and farms. There's if you put in where are the restaurants in this town, they're all in kind of one place, because that's the place you go when you want to eat out. That's a very efficient way to do things. Across the river, you walk down through that neighborhood on the other side of the river, and you can get pizza. If it's time for a pizza, you know where to go, right? That is actually a very efficient organization of space, is for people to know where to go. All right. So that's what this traditional form of a settlement is. It's that things are in a place that makes sense. And it's not a very big center. This is a 20,000 people live here. And it's about a half a kilometer is that central area where all the shopping is and things. And then if you look out 2 kilometers, you've got most of the people who participate, who live, who say, this is my place. I live in Grenoble. I live here. Most of them live within 2 kilometers of the center. So if you look at the city of Grenoble, metropole of Grenoble, and you start to draw 4-kilometer radius circles, you get 7 of them that occupy that space. And what's funny is if you start to look for where they are, I just showed you where they are. They encompass activity systems. So the people want, or they have to go to university. They live in the university town. All right. They want to work at Schneider. They live in that. I don't know if it's a Schneider town, but it's it's where those jobs are. All right. So they find their place in the city by locating the urban town that fits their activity web and provides access to their employment and their activities. So they find a place where things work for them. Because they don't have cars, they can get around. They can go anywhere. But that activity web, it's just more efficient and easier if you're in the right place. All right. So let me reiterate. What we learned was that where you work, where you have to go in order to support your family, that is the first thing. That's the first thing. It is what we think about too, but we normally focus on where our house is. So it's a little bit different perspective. Those workers, these employers also care a lot about where their workers are because they must have the workers. Then those workers must find housing and they must find the other activities that they need. That housing, actually, a lot of it is related to the company somehow. There's some company financing of some new developments that we've seen. Some of these town centers have actually been developed with big employers, like the university. Of course, there's landlords, people who own places that will rent them out. There are owners who buy and sell in exchange. And there's a new thing that looks to us like a cooperative of some sort. It's a new kind of financial arrangement and legal arrangement for homes, for where people live. And we've seen things like it. That's okay. So we kind of get what they're doing, but we didn't have time while we were there to really understand it all. I should mention they were all speaking French, which is why I had to take Jeremy with me to translate. All right, so now we're going to backcast. We're going to come back to our time, and we're going to ask ourselves, what do they have that we don't have? What's different there? They're French people living in Grenoble. It looks more or less the same. What do they have that we don't have? What's different? All right. So here are our disruptive discoveries. What's new there? They don't have flying cars, by the way. They have a way to find their place and establish their activity web without using vehicles because they don't have vehicle mobility. They have a way to do it. Of course they want to do it. We didn't have to get them to want to have a place to live where they could get to work and schools and all their activities. We did not have to convince them of that. But they had to have a way to do it. All right, so that's what we discovered. People need a way. And they have a way to, maybe not the individual households, but the city. It has a way to know what infrastructure should be built. And the way they do that is they integrate the demand from the activity web into their planning. That activity web, the way that people are exploring it and using it, it lets you know what the demand is. Have you ever seen anything like that? Have you ever booked a flight? You book an airline flight. You do what? You go into their interface. You tell it where, when, It shows you what's possible. It just took data from you. You look at different prices. You choose. It just took data from you. And the airlines are using that data to inform their planning. Okay? So it's that kind of a thing that in people organizing their lives, they generate the data that lets the metropole help them to organize their lives. All right? And not only the metropole, but companies. Where do I want to set up a restaurant? Well, I can tell from the activity web that there's a real need for a restaurant over there. There's plenty over here, but there's more needed here because people are looking for a restaurant there. All right? There's more need for this kind of housing in that area. And remember, the activity web, it isn't just households, it's companies. It's employers wanting to make sure that there is the accessible area for their workers around them. That area has everything their workers need, so they can attract workers. All right, and there is a way for those new things to be built that isn't really like the bank financing that we know. It's a different way. And it might be more familiar to people 100 years ago or 200 years ago when they would build things that would really outlive them. They didn't build something that they intended to turn over in a few years, or they were going to depreciate, or the way we think about financing now. That what they're doing is different. They have a way to finance things that generates sustained value. And that's a different concept. I think we can understand it, but it will take some work. And so that leads us to our shift projects. If you understand what it is that we've discovered there, then the project is, how would we develop that? Right? We've got the concept of what could work. What would be the way that you could do things? And now we want to look at what would the project be to establish that? What do we need to learn? What do we not know? What would we need to build and test? Is there something we can already use that's part of that? Can we adapt some things that already exist? Can we understand how this works by looking at other examples? All right, so that's the sort of thing we're doing. Now, what I would really like you to do is use the notepad, and we have a discussion period after I show you our shift projects, the projects we think could be done. If I was going to pitch a project to somebody and say, please fund me for this, it'll be great, I promise. You might not understand it all the way because that's the way innovations are. There's not very many times that somebody who sees an innovation and says, okay, I got it, that everybody else will get it too. But if I'm going to pitch this innovation and try and get a project going to work on it, then these are what I'm going to do. I would want to do these projects. Now, I want you to write down any questions you have about them. So during the discussion, Jeremy can answer those questions. Okay, so you have some paper? All right, ready? The first project is to build an activity web. This thing looks really cool. It's kind of an engine, and yeah, it's got some of the GIS data that Google uses. Of course it does. It's got that global positioning, that global information, the geospatial information. It's got that stuff. But it's doing new things with it. And if you know how the GIS data works, the first layer is the ground. Right? Where's the river? Where's the tram line? Right? Oh, no, sorry. The first layer is just the ground. Where's the mountain? Where's the river? Where's the lake? Where's the hill? All right. So that's the first layer. And then the next layer is what is on that land. So where's the transport network? That's one of the layers. Where are the houses? Where are the different businesses? There's also layers that show where are the sewer lines? Where are the electrics? electric cables. So these are now geospatially located data. So data that's in a place. And it's possible to generate more of those layers, like a layer that shows the number of employment of what kind. I don't know if we've seen anything like that, but we can understand it could be done. You need to get the data and locate it and categorize it, and then you need to be able to access it. And the interesting new thing here is the activity layers. Being able to think about geospatial reality as having activities in it. What that would be like, I don't know. That's why I want to do the project. Because I know if we understand activity systems, then we can understand what we need to do to make those activity systems work, where they're already good, they're working fine, why people are attracted to different areas because the activity system is working well here, what's missing over here. And when I've done this kind of work in New Zealand, really understanding where there's an area that needs a school. Because you can find out that the people in that area, their activity system includes this 12-kilometer drive to a school, when everyone else has a 200-meter walk to a school. That there's, in our whole city, there's a part of the city that's being starved for something. It doesn't have a complete web. All right? And that kind of programming, it is possible. It's kind of at a new level, but it's possible. So we're talking about a big data and modeling engine that lets you place these layers in, access them, and model what the accessibility is. That's the other one. Looking at the world not just by where things are, but what the accessibility is, which means you need two places. Okay? So geospatial data says there's a thing here. An activity model says there's two things, and they're connected. Okay? So it is more programming, more modeling, more data, but we got bigger computers. All right. We're also looking for, at the end of the day, what are different options? What are different ways that things could be done? That makes it even more complex, but that's okay. So a whole nother area. So just a little illustration of what I mean by this activity web engine. Given a house, pick a house. Its activity web requires access along networks. Right? They can't walk through there. They can go through the park on the path that exists if they want to go to the post office. So if you think of all the activities, the bank, the school, the playground, the probability, so what we want to do is for a given house, how many of these can they access within walking distance, within cycle distance? And then we can tell just by the statistics of what their accessibility is, what we need to do here, what's missing. Or whether that house fits you and your activity web. So we can do two things. We can help people find their place with the activity web, and we can understand what we need to build next, what we need to improve. Okay? So this will be a really powerful engine, and I'm pretty sure we can build it. All right. And the real power of it, of course, is the workplaces, connecting up the workplaces to the houses. All right, the next project, the place finder. If people are going to use the activity web, then there needs to be a user interface, which, okay, Google's kind of like it, or street maps, that you say, I want to go there, and it says, okay, well, there's this way and that way, and it'll take you this long. That's good information right now for that trip. But I want my life, right? So the complexity of information that in order to use this engine for your life, for your activity web, that user interface has to have different layers of information than Google has right now. This is a program from the town I'm from in Colorado originally, which is Golden, Colorado. And what it shows you is the houses that are, well, you click in the houses that are for sale at the current time. That's really useful information. And the houses that have sold recently, I can click on that one. I think that's what I've got here. The different houses that have been sold. I've got some apartments. That's really useful information. But it's on its own. It's by itself. It's just that information. What if it was connected to the activity web? What if I could put my activities in there and I could then use this interface to map out where would be a good house for me? And I can also put in my requirements for a house. And what if that house doesn't exist? What if that information then goes to people who might be willing to change house because they want to go somewhere else? What if that information went to developers who, you've got to get the financing, you've got to know the demand is there for the thing you're going to build, and having this system would let you know that. So again, I'm not actually telling anyone to do anything. I'm helping them to live their life. I'm helping them to find their place in this big, complex world. Did we have to do this before? Jeremy's visiting his parents. How long has your family been in that house?
7 years.
7 years in that house. How about your grandparents' house?
Well, 7 plus.
Okay. So how in the world did people ever find their place? Maybe it wasn't quite as complex as a city of 450,000 people, right? What's the size of your parents' town?
50, 67.
Okay, 50, 60,000. So if Grenoble is actually comprised of towns of 50, 60,000, maybe that's the way to look at Grenoble. If you need to get organized like that in order to live without cars. All right. The next project. I think your mechanical engineers are going to have a really fun time with these dual-use trams. I think Alstom's going to want to be involved. I think the BO market would be very interested in being able to source things directly from farms up the valley and not have to put it in a truck. It'd be very nice to put it on the electric tram. I think that electric, we call it a forklift, the thing that moves that load, the container that it goes in, making sure it's not a plastic container, that it has a tracking device, that it has security, built, the tram itself, routing it up the valley. These people need a tram anyway, I think. Where's their tram? There was a tram there, right? They're missing a tram out there. So we've got this tram building project. I know. But it needs to be done. And what if it's exciting like that? What if, I know the economics of building trams is tough, but what if it's also collecting fees for moving goods? So in the early morning and the night, the goods are moving around. Economics getting better? Possibly. Carbon emissions are going down. All right, so we've got extended routes, and then we've got, actually in the city there's only a few extensions that need to be there we need one down to this new town center, and we start to map out the new trams according to where goods are coming from and where the town centers are. You can't use a tram to distribute goods throughout Los Angeles. But you can to a city where there are centers where people go for things. So that's where we're going. And that urban town redevelopment, this shift project, I gave it a name. There's a new company, From the Ground Up. So it's looking at the ground, it's using all that geospatial data, using the activity webs, and figuring out where does this new town center go. And I'm mining a lot of things, including where the old buildings have got to go. Where do the new buildings go? Because the old buildings have got to go. I don't know if French does that, but I like it. Coming and going. All right. So here's an example of where I might find a new town center. You recognize the university. This university involves a lot of people. It's a little hard to get to. One time I rented an apartment here to go to the university. I thought, oh, that's close. It wasn't that close. It was difficult. All right. So thinking about the people who engage in this activity, and that, as far as I can tell, they don't have a town center there. This area here is all that 1970s building. I would pick that place, and that's that half a kilometer radius, 2 kilometer radius for reference. So your university town, I've got these 1970s buildings. I want to replace them with the high standard multi-use urban center. And that's what that looks like. Right? That's just building stuff. Who doesn't want to build stuff? I think it could be done. How would it be done? Oh, that sounds like a problem, doesn't it? Well, we would have to really see how this is going to work. So we need some, what I'm calling integrated placemaking modelization. Urban planners do this, right? They make a picture of what it'll look like when it's done. What it will look like is important. That's one layer. How your activity web will fit into it is another thing we need to understand. How the businesses that are located there will get foot traffic and be profitable. How the enterprises that are there, a factory, will integrate into that. It's not just about what the buildings look like at all. It's about how each square meter is used and returns a profit and returns taxes. Okay? That kind of modelization. Some of the, what do they call them? Master planning. Some of them include some of that. It's a big job, but it's a project. There's also a process by which you involve citizens, and it's called a charrette process. It's not that, it's maybe 10 years old. It's quite successful. But what it is you do the design that would actually work. Then you involve the people to give their ideas, but in the context of what would work. You take that back to the drawing board, bring it back. It's a way to do urban design, but integrated with the people who will actually populate it. But not just let them make up stuff. I like it. It's a good process. We could integrate it in. And then we've got to look at this project of change from a different perspective. We've got to look at it as what we want to do. Why that's where I want to go. And so a festival atmosphere where in fact, in order to make this kind of a change, you don't have to convince everybody. You have to get exactly the right people. Yeah, and you have to find the drivers, and you have to find the people who are positive about that. So these festivals is a way to bring those people out of the woodwork and have them start to be part of this change that's happening. And then we have to figure out this economics. So find some really open-minded economists and financiers and say, we're going to innovate. Yes, in your field, we are going to innovate. And it might be that you have to actually have a new type of economics, and the old guys can't help you, but I don't know yet. All right, so that's that shift project. I've got one more. We know that Grenoble is more cyclable than people are using it for, right? We know it's cyclable, but it isn't. So if you think about, if you asked 10 people, would you ride a bicycle? Pick one of your activities that you go to. Would you ride a bicycle? And they will all say, yes, but. I would, but. Right? There's always some reason why not. I think the e-bike is going to overcome some of those reasons. It really does. Definitely having a safe way to go. The perception that the way that you have to move through the city and interact with vehicles is stressful and not safe. That would be a pretty big barrier. The question of if people are going to steal your bike, that's come up as a concern. So maybe where you go with the bike needs to be safe. But let's turn it around, right? Let's say, okay, instead of saying cycle infrastructure in Grenoble, let's turn it around and let's pick a place. Let's pick an activity. Children should be able to cycle to their school. And in 2 years, there aren't going to be any more drop-offs. So, what are you going to do? That's a school where I put that poor school is trapped between freeways, and the railroad. So I'm guessing not many of those students cycle to school. I don't know. I'm guessing. I'll bet their parents drop them off because it's congested. There's a lot of people trying to get in and out of there. And it's hard to get there. So the parents know they can get there by car, so that's how they do it. But in 2 years, there's going to be no more drop-offs at the school, so that's the project. Who goes to that school? These are the cycleways. They have to be connected. They're for a purpose. They're for a particular person. They build a particular activity web. It's a complete thought. And it's important. It's for the safety of our children, and it's because they, as citizens, in their lifetime, are going to be living a cycling lifestyle. So it's not a foreign thing to them. It is their reality. So we start building that now. So one way of looking at cycling in the city is all of the projects that there could be done of paths and infrastructure, yes. Another way is those children must be able to cycle to school. Okay? It's just another way. And I'm guessing that your traffic engineers could figure out, if they had the data about who goes to that school, they could figure out how to build the safe pathways through there for the children. Yeah? So I think that's a very good, doable one. All right. We are now going to have question time until lunch, or discussion time. I've hit you with a lot of information, a lot of ideas, and so hopefully you wrote down questions if you had them. What we want to do in the workshop is, you remember your mission. At the end of the day, there's going to be some people to pitch an idea to, or pitch a project. You want to do an actual project. Which project do you want to do? Which project do you know about? If you already know how that sort of big data stuff could be done and how many students it would take and what companies you would work with, then maybe you want to go to the activity web project. If you already know about transport planning, maybe you want to do that one. If you know about property development, we really need help in the urban center development project. If you're curious about how would people, what would that project be like to build this interface that people use to explore the city by finding their place? What would that be like? Because it's like some things that I've heard of, so I think it could be done, but to build it for Grenoble, for us, in French, what would that be like? All right? So that's what I'm asking now, is to think about your interest, what project do you want to work on, and then we are open for questions. So there are your projects, and Jeremy can definitely help with those in French. All right, so that's it from me, except for discussion. Oh, Jeremy, you want to give a rundown of the projects in French, just to make sure people go.
Vous voulez un petit résumé des différents projets en français ou c'est assez bon pour vous pour le moment? Ouais. Si vous avez des questions, du coup, en français, en anglais.
Raphael has a question.
I feel a big weakness in the methodology.
Oh no!
Yeah, I'm getting like this. You know me? I think when you want to, for example, to make a new tramline in one side of the town, it will overprice the local area. So people will be repelled in the other side of the town exactly as now. How can you avoid this?
All right,
we
so
just reorganize the city, but with the same drawback than now. People are living in one place because it's cheap, and in another place because they want to have their children in certain school. And how can you avoid this?
I think that's a really good question, because what you're saying is the way things are is like this, right? If we do see new developments in the city, very often it's a higher price development pushing lower income people out so they can have that nice space. The city tries to build some affordable housing. You know, we've got these frictions and competitions, and every time the city invests in some infrastructure, it changes the value of properties, and that changes everything again. All right. Remember when I said that there's a very interesting project here, which is the new way the economics works? I have found something like this, because I've been thinking, this is a really old problem. It's a big problem for us because we can build so fast now, and because we have so much infrastructure. So surely somebody has figured out something that's better. And the Israelis. They have very old cities. They have very constrained space. They have growing population. They have old buildings that need refurbishment because they could have earthquakes. So they have a lot of rebuilding to do, a lot of preserving of benefit, and a lot of creating of new spaces for the new people coming. So they have this problem, and they've had it for a while. And maybe they think a little differently than us. But here's what they do. The people who live in Tel Aviv or Haifa, they know that their city needs to be rebuilt. And they know that they can't gouge the system because the way the system works. So they know that someday when the plan gets to their neighborhood, it will be time for them to get a new apartment.
I think it's exactly like in China, because people know that we have a new apartment in exchange of old one. But in France,
Possibly.
it won't be the case. There will be a winner and the other one.
Well, maybe you should volunteer for that project, because we do have to discover how the French do this project. What is the sensibility that French people have that they would understand the fairness, the logic, the benefit of doing it this particular way. So the example I have of the Israelis, you know, they think a lot like I do. It's not like China, where I understand they think differently. But that idea that people have a forward-looking vision about what is happening, and they're kind of locked into the benefit and the cost. Because when you have a totally free market is where things can get really out of whack like that. So they have a free market, but within a context of what we're going to accomplish. So it's a legal construct within the title to property, because you have to transfer title of a property from an existing property to a as yet built property. And we can learn something from them.
This without responding to the real issue, the real local issue, for example, in Grenoble, of the difference of price, local price. For example, this is the part of France that are not
right. No, I believe you, because that's a...
It's a key issue in Grenoble.
Well, in Grenoble City, within that city itself, as I've walked around, I've seen apartments which are maybe 10 times more expensive than some blocks over. Yeah? And it does go with the area, right? And I see some beautification of some areas that are probably driving the prices up. And that's how it is. So I guess what I'm saying is that that's probably not going to change, the fact that within a city there's a diversity of price. We're going to create more of those. You see what I mean? It's going to be important when we build a new city center that it have a diversity of price and a diversity of property type. And that's got to be built in somehow. And it might be built in a number of ways, but that's the project. Does that make sense?
We'll discuss.
Okay. That's my answer. Anybody else have any other ideas? Because I think you all know the issue, that there's lower priced places where people can live, and that by a investment in infrastructure, they can lose that because the property price, if I got the gist, the question right.
Shift project.
A shift project. Right. Any other comments or questions?
Perhaps another comment. I see the idea is to suppress the car, but we have to answer why people are taking their car. I think it's not because they want to pollute, or because they are bad or just lazy. They drive their car because they live very far, I think, and they live very far, still for price reason, local price reason. So I think we have to put this in mind when reviewing this city, why people drive their car.
Yeah, I think you're right. Which is why I don't think I would pick one of these to do. I think I would pick all of them because they intersect with each other. You've got to be able to build the right places and the right houses in the right place. The free market has delivered what we've got, right? It has pushed people out, and that's true in every city. You drive till you can afford it. Yeah, and then there's a motorway, so there you go. 100 years from now, that system is different. So somehow what we have changes, and that's what we want to work on. How would it change? And people have to be able to find a different place. So therefore, how we're going to build affordable houses in the city, that's a nice big project. How does that work? And there are examples, there are ways that people are trying and experimenting with to do that. And I would want to do that. I would want to be involved in that.
Just a quick, perhaps additional thing. On the dual use of trams, I was thinking about why not thinking about the river as well. Because how we can use the river to get some food or to get the access of goods. Because if we extend this scenario to the territory,
All right.
we need to have the tram go somewhere, but it needs to be refilled with other goods. So if we don't get how do we ensure the continuity of goods on the territory and some junction sections? So I see the I would say the scale of that we consider here. That's only the city, but it would be interesting to see that perhaps we have some access of goods that goes further with the river, and they enter in the city with the river.
All right. Does that kind of capture it? That this dual-use tram is a shift project. That if we had dual-use trams that could move goods, that would be a new thing. That would be a thing that will be useful. Yeah, we've got a river out there. What about that? I would say that is definitely a good project. And how do the trains, probably like most people, most countries, the intermodal network is missing because of trucks. Because you've got the truck mobility, you don't have to have that connection anymore, those connections and how they operate. So building those back is a good project. How would we build them back again? I mean, you can see that having them is where we need to go, but then the actual how. So I have a PhD student working on that right now, and it's about looking at the value of having those nodes to the producers and in time, because right now, just do it the way you're doing it. Yeah, that's always the answer, but as you look forward, if it requires new innovations in the technology that lets you do that transfer at a lower cost and more efficiently, we haven't actually looked at that lately. It was done by hand before, and now we haven't even looked at it. There must be lots of products there of how to do that intermodal connection. It's done kind of by brute force right now, and it's not very elegant, and there's room for innovation there. So I agree with you, and I like I said, these are things that just came up as doable projects, could be started now, definitely lead in the right direction. There's no upper limit to the number of these types of projects, right? It's we're talking about as we move into the future, what are we going to do? So there's some examples. Any other ideas or comments?
I'm thinking about all this is to support the activity that we have today. The idea that we're going to be able to ensure our activity web.
Right.
But why, if we are doing too much? Why if how to also create a new scenario to have a project where the important thing is to mutualize, to do less, to perhaps to be less mobile, perhaps to it's linked to what is like recreating some city centers and so on. It's linked to that, to this, but I think perhaps we need also infrastructure to reduce the complexity of the system, or I don't know, perhaps not infrastructure. But
well, with the modelization, with being able to model how your activity web would work in the city, you can then start to envision changes to the city and then explore what that does. So in another field I work in, buildings, we build models of the building that are based on the physics of how the building works, right? There's so many square meters of window, so many square meters of floor, the materials are like this, and then we can play with that model to understand what would happen if. So
it means that perhaps from this kind of model we can understand by ourselves that some behavior that we have cannot still exist.
Or even better yet, you can find a different lifestyle in the city you're already in.
But not thinking about that everything is possible. Because I have the impression sometimes that by modeling too much and having too much data, we think that everything is still possible. We can do everything, but in a less time, and then we can ensure every need and every. So perhaps it's also about rethinking, like constraints, but understand constraint and deal with it in a positive way.
The way I turn it around, constraints are real, and we can see them. But if you want to turn it around, you can say, how about the possibility space? It means what you can do within that constraint. So there's the positive version of the same data.
Opportunities.
Right, the opportunities within the possibility space. What can you do?
And in terms of sustainability, how do you assess or determine those constraints? And do you have any ideas in mind? From my perspective, if you try to figure out what is sustainability, then it's about what you extract from your environment and what you release into it, and it's a question of flux. And then maybe for a given geographical area, you should be able to determine some boundaries on that flux. And so once you know the boundaries you cannot exceed, then you can determine your possibility space.
Right. This question, you hear it a lot. What is sustainability? How do we know what to build? Because it needs to be sustainable. What if I asked this one? Let's change the perspective. Right? in the method we just followed, I asked that question. I want to know this, but I asked that question. What is not sustainable? And it was hard. I knew that the cars were unsustainable, but I wanted to see what the world without cars is like. And so
Maybe
that's what I did.
Cars are unsustainable is that the level at which we use cars is unsustainable.
This question has a different answer whether you're here or at the next step or at the next step. So as long as you know where you're going, as long as you're working on that, doing a project, that's something. What is sustainability? That Grenoble 2118 that we visited, would you try to measure their sustainability?
I would like to. Yeah, I would like to know what is the geographical area of Grenoble able to endorse in terms of what amount of CO2 that we can emit into the Grenoble area to be sustainable, what amount of strategic material we can extract from this environment, or what quantity of waste we are able to manage, etc. Because from my perspective, this is the way that we can determine the constraint of your possibility space.
Right. In our method there, we just picked one constraint as being sufficient to generate ideas. Mm-hmm. And if you can get yourself to the point where you can define a constraint and get your head around it and really understand that constraint, then you can either collapse in despair or get creative. So that's what we did. We did it with oil, because oil is also climate change. They're the same problem. And so just with oil for transport, and that makes sense because that's what that problem is. With waste, water, like you say, find the constraint, then get busy. With fuel, we talked about gas, we talked about reducing the demand for gas. Project we did in Munich in the last couple of months was for a boiler company, because they wanted to know what should we be working on with our boilers, because nobody seems to like us anymore. We make a perfectly good, very efficient oil boiler. Nobody likes us. What should we be working on? And so I don't know. They like the outcome, and they're starting a project working on that. So very specific question, define the system and go to work on it. So I agree with you. There's lots of angles of sustainability.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's more complicated than this from my perspective, because if you go to a specific question and you try to solve it, sometimes there are externalities on other systems and so on, and so stuff are interconnected. So maybe you need to have several levels to deal with that. And some stuff that are very global in terms of, by the way, and what you said in terms of the quantity of oil we consume yearly in the world. Okay, we know that this is not possible anymore, and so we need to have a global tolerance. But then when you get down to scales of complexity, then you have to make some... Yeah.
Oh, maybe I didn't write that very clear, but what do we do today? But
the problem is that...
That's the question of the day. What if we're going to propose a project to the politicians in 2 hours or 3 hours after lunch? What do we do today?
Maybe try to assess the constraints or determine the possibility space for the Grenoble area. Well,
there's nothing concrete in that.
Yeah, sure. You can figure out the ecosystem. How does this work? How do you? What is there inside? What can you modify in it? How does this work? It's very concrete.
No, there's no result in the end. When some of these projects, you have
you can provide the people the possibility space. You need to have this possibility space, otherwise how do you know that what you are going is going the right way? If you don't know that it's inside your possibility space, maybe you ask us.
Well, I think I agree with you to a certain extent, but those constraints that we're talking about, You see how simple I made the constraint in order to find a project to do with oil? I just said, well, in 100 years it isn't there. So I have done this project with environmental scientists.
Maybe in 100 years you cannot extract neodymium to make magnets. How do you deal with that?
That would be the project. What do we have to start to do now to make sure we recover every bit of that material?
No, it's impossible to recover every bit.
Well, every bit we can.
Large amount of, but not every. And that's the problem.
Jay.
I do agree with Guillaume the fact that there are systemic effects, but the question is how, in fact, we can't investigate all the systemic effects, and so we have to know there's systemic effects. Of course, they are difficult to understand, difficult to describe, but I think that in the first descriptions of this 5 shift project, we already have a systemic point of view. They were based on a systemic point of view. Of course, it's not sufficient. Of course, some constraints have not been explained, of course. I think that we have to consider this method as a stage. We have to develop the shift project, imagine them, and then in a further time we have to find the different relation with this project. And of course, some of the projects we will define today won't be compatible or won't be will have external effect to other projects, and so other shift projects have to be readjusted. So I think it's an iterative method.
Sure.
And that's one remark. The second remark is relative to the, in fact, to the up to define what is systemic. I think it's a dream. We, even with developed database, we will never can define a systemic point of view. So, systemic point of view is a name, but it's not a realistic goal.
Let me reflect on the question, because we didn't actually talk about environmental issues in this project that we did. We had the project of massification of people so that they don't drive their cars and they choose an insulated house. That was our part of the puzzle we were looking at. There is one of these that really does integrate environmental questions into it, and that's if we're redeveloping urban town areas and we do it right, it must free up area between for more parks and maybe some urban farming, urban agriculture, because we're adding more texture to our city. It used to have texture 100 years ago. There was the city and there was farmland and industry, and so there was sort of this this texture to it. And then the 70s, you can make suburbia, right? All right. So if we are going to reestablish this texture, then let's look at the way the water moves through the city and the way our drainage works, and let's make sure that when we build these new developments, they have that whole integrated. It's not just apartments. It's got the 3 waters, right? The water retention. It's got the integration of the outdoor space for people. How are we going to integrate trees in there? I had a environmental scientist tell me that if you could put 30% of your city in soil instead of whatever else is there, in design of the city, if you could put 30% in soil, that that can be sort of free and long lasting. It's not like a mowed grass or something. Then you could have basically the whole soil and bird and insect ecosystem in the city too. That an ecosystem can tolerate a lot of holes in it and still be whole. And so for him that was a utopia of a city of the future would actually have this sort of Swiss cheese, and the natural areas have to be connected to, especially by streamways. So I thought, I don't know, how much land would that be? And essentially without cars, you can come pretty close, because those natural areas can also be cycleways and park areas and playgrounds, and you can integrate that outdoor space and catch the water so it doesn't just run off into the Isar from the hard surfaces of the city. So if you're going to take the shot at redeveloping, definitely integrate all that complexity into that project. So that might be a good one.
Just to remark, I think we are trying to save the city.
I'm trying to save the city.
I think perhaps it is not the good way of living. Because destroying the city should be a solution also. I mean, reinvest a small city.
Who invited this guy?
Big cities in France, it's 20% of the population, and 80% are living in small cities that are following exactly what you want to do. So you can imagine that this 20% go to the small cities, which will just increase the population by a small factor, and you destroy the city.
Well, it's entirely possible
that
the redeveloping. There's parts of the city now that will just be natural area where they were a shopping mall now. So it's entirely possible that some what you might call destruction is going to happen, or reclamation maybe, or repurposing. I hope you don't mean destroying like the whole Grenoble city, just the metropole. Okay.
I think it's a specific question for Grenoble, because the size of Grenoble is very small because of the mountain, the mountains. And so effectively, if you compare Grenoble with other cities, especially in North America or maybe in Australia, the question of the land is very important. And one of the questions is where shall we compact the space, the urbanized space? Is it in the first suburb, or should be further, where at the end of the train station, at the end of the tram line, around the railway stations? But I think it's not a problem to consider that, because we can easily add another shift project that would be the densification around the railway stations in small cities. That could be an example. So, but we are only 25 here. Maybe we can't work on 6 projects, 6 shift projects.
Well, it's I like where we've gotten to, because on the whole we are thinking about what we could actually do, right? Like if I was going to be involved in a project and I was going to pitch it and I was going to get funding and I was going to do something, and that's a good place to be. It's better than wondering how would I get people to share their cars. Providing a walking lifestyle is a different view on the same thing. Being able to see the city in a way that people don't have to drive till they can afford a place. That actually the building project we've got to do is about creating the space for everybody in the city, or actually near the employers. That's the point. People don't just live in a house. It's actually about what we do here. So that's we're supplying the housing for the people who need to be here.
And what about shifting the definition of an employer by activities? Because if we move to a transition where the population is older, for instance, it would be a different way of viewing employers. It's much more where my activity has a sense to be, how can I ensure the activity of everyone
Right.
in different places?
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why that activity web is about that. It's about a 3-year-old child. Their activity web is around their home and where they go during the day, like kindergarten or something. So the demographic definitely affects what that web looks like. And with an older population, it'll be interesting. Because right now, what do we do with those people? We segregate them, right? You go over there. We're done with you. Maybe that's a good way. Maybe that is another thing we need to rethink. Just like having a diversity of affordability, maybe a diversity of demographic. I would like to model it and see how it works if you do different things. Yeah. Well, we're supposed to have a lunch provided.
Yes. How do you limit the number of shift projects to end?
Oh, you were supposed to vote. You were supposed to write down what shift project you wanted to work on. And I think that this one, that is a good fit in with the tram one, because each of the shift projects, one of the questions you need to answer is this project, how does it relate to or impact other things? Because we do have to keep that in mind. So if we could get the dual-use tram thing and we could start to really think about freight, because freight's a funny one. People don't have the data for it. It needs work. We need the data for the freight. So we start on this, and that will lead to actually more data for the whole project. So write down what projects you want to work on, what you know about, you want to work on, you're interested in. And then during lunch, we will figure out how many projects we have. Because nobody wants to work on the school access one, then I'm not going to force you. All right, and we have instructions for you for the lunch. If it's possible.
Mais déjà, on aimerait remercier Suzanne pour son exposé, parce que c'est vrai que c'était tellement passionnant qu'on a enchaîné directement sur les questions. Donc on a manqué à nos devoirs. On remercie Suzanne pour son exposé, cet exposé qui était différent de ceux auxquels on avait déjà assisté. Vous avez remarqué l'effort de contextualisation. Très très vite, Suzanne est rentrée dans le vif du sujet, c'est-à-dire que peut-on faire en appliquant le Transition Engineering à notre métropole. Donc vraiment merci Suzanne pour cet effort. You do not understand my French, but we warmly thank you for the effort to apply everything to our specific context, and we know how much it is difficult to understand the context and then to elaborate on the possible shift projects. Okay. Donc on remercie aussi toutes vos questions pertinentes allant de la destruction à Grenoble. C'est passionnant, donc super. Alors évidemment c'est important de rester toute la journée. Donc cet après-midi on va travailler sur les shift projects. Donc n'oubliez pas d'annoter les petits post-it, comme ça nous on va préparer à l'heure de midi la session de l'après-midi. Et avant de clôturer, on remercie une nouvelle fois l'IDEX et la métropole, parce que si on est ici, c'est parce qu'ils ont pu nous soutenir. Donc vraiment important cet engagement collectif.